Okay, we're on Genesis chapter 39. Verse 1 says, Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. Now Joseph was taken to Egypt. The beginning of the prophecy given to Abraham does not begin until the family moves to Egypt. And that's still a few years away. That was in Genesis 15, verse 13. We read, And Elohim said to Abram, Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. Now, it says 400 years they're going to be enslaved and oppressed. It seems to be at odds with a passage in Exodus, which says 430 years. That's in Exodus 12, verses 40 and 41. Now, the time that the sons of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. And it came about at the end of 430 years to the very day that all the hosts of Yahweh went out from the land of Egypt. Okay, why does this one say 400 and this say 430? What's that? Yeah, exactly. You know, who was in charge when they first got there? Joseph. And he was in charge, he was the second in command, and Pharaoh gave him all command, and he probably had it for 30 years. Now, it says here, where they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. The slavery and oppression apparently didn't start till 30 years later after Joseph died. But all in all, they were there 430 years. We read in Exodus 1, starting in verse 6, And Joseph died, and all his brothers, all that generation. But the sons of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly and multiplied and became exceedingly mighty, so that the land was filled with them. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Now we're going to find out that Joseph gave them the riches of the entire world, okay, due to his management. And then this next Pharaoh comes along and says, Who was Joseph? It doesn't ring a bell, sorry. So the bad times start. And he said to his people, Behold, the sons of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And in the event of war, they also join themselves to those who hate us and fight against us and depart from the land. So they were there for a total of 430 years, but the first 30 were, you could say, probably pretty nice. Yeah. No, not yet. No. Really, it was, I'd say this was all the disobedience of the whole group is what led to this. You know, Jacob and his sons. And they had their share of problems that they had. You know, there was a daughter that was a harlot. There was Levi and his brother that killed a whole town. There was Reuben that went Betty by with his stepmother, and just all kinds of. So they paid for those sins, okay? Now, the precise year that we're at is difficult to determine, okay? With the amount of information we have, we can't put a lot of certainty in it. Archaeology and other things tell us it was probably between 1875 BC to 1728 BC, and it's probably among that older range, actually. So we're 1,800 years before the time of Messiah. Genesis 39, verses 2 through 4. And Yahweh was with Joseph, so he became a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now his master saw that Yahweh was with him, and now Yahweh caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and became his personal servant. And he made him overseer over his house, and all that he owned he put in his charge. So Elohim was with Joseph. He prospered because Elohim blessed everything that he did. Now Potiphar picked up on this and made him the overseer of all his household. Now it was not uncommon for Asian slaves to be brought into the household and enjoy a superior status to Egyptian slaves who worked in the fields. Now, this was brought to light by Egyptian papyrus called the Brooklyn 35.44 or 1446, And that was from about 1800 BC. Now, because of this, Joseph was given that opportunity to display his administrative talents to Potiphar. There is a downside to this. He's in the household of Potiphar now. And Potiphar has a wife, okay? And there's a problem here. Verse 5, and it came about that from the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he owned, Yahweh blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. Thus Yahweh's blessing was upon all that he owned in house and in the field. So he blessed the house of Potiphar, Elohim did, because of Joseph. The entire household was blessed. Verse 6, so he left everything he owned in Joseph's charge. And with him there he did not concern himself with anything except the food which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Joseph, he's described as handsome and built well. Who else was described that way? We've already read about him here in Genesis. No, in Genesis. Actually, it was Rachel, his mother. In Genesis 29, verse 17, and Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful of form and face. And we had Rachel and we had Leah. Do you remember what Leah meant? Well, we're not sure exactly, but it looks like it means either cow or strong woman. But they had 6 kids. Jacob and her did. Verses 7 and 8, and it came about after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph. And she said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, with me here my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he has put all that he owns in my charge. So it came about after these events. This is apparently years later now that this incident takes place. Joseph knows the responsibility and trust that Potiphar has placed in his hands. I don't know how well does that picture show up there? Did you ever see the movie The Graduate? I don't know why that was the poster for The Graduate. They put an Egyptian guy, Joseph and Potiphar. Just thought that was cute. Verse 9, and there was no one greater in this house than I, and he was withheld nothing from me except you, because you're his wife. How then could I do this great evil and sin against Elohim? Okay, this is an enormous declaration of faithfulness by Joseph. First of all, how does he know that adultery is sin? If there was no Torah. There was the Torah. There had to be the Torah. And not only that, who does he say the sin is against? Elohim. Yeah. Adultery is a sin against Elohim. In Leviticus 6, verse 2, when a person sins and acts unfaithfully against Yahweh and deceives his companion in regard to a deposit or a security entrusted to him, or through robbery, or if he's extorted from his companion, and so on. So if you sin, you act unfaithfully toward Yahweh. Numbers 32, verse 23, but if you will not do so, behold, you have sinned against Yahweh, and be sure your sin will find you out. We read in Psalm 51, verse 4, against you, you only I have sinned, and done what is evil in your sight, so that you are justified when you do speak, and blameless when you do judge. Why? But he says, David writes there in that Psalm 51, verse 4, it's only against Elohim we sin. Don't we sin against each other also? No, we really don't. Sin is lawlessness, right? Breaking of the law, the Torah. Whose Torah is it? It's his. You're breaking his Torah, okay? So your sin is against him. Now, we do transgress against one another, all right? And we need to, make atonement, ask for forgiveness, whatever, when that happens. But sin, by definition, is against Elohim. Now, this thing with Joseph here, that's another piece of overwhelming evidence that the Torah was known by men before the time of Mount Sinai. If chapter 38 doesn't convince you with Judah and Tamar, I don't know if anything will. When it talks about the Levirate law and the harlot of a priest is to be burned and all that kind of stuff. We're getting into pretty, minute detail here about how Torah was known. Joseph knows that nothing in Potiphar's house and all his possessions is withheld from him except his wife. Verse 10, and it came about as she spoke to Joseph day after day that he did not listen to her, to lie beside her, or be with her. She tempted him every day. But he didn't pay attention to her, and he did not have sexual relations with that woman. Only he told the truth. Right? Nor did he have the desire. He stayed away. Yeah, right. And how did he keep the desire away? Well, you just don't covet. You don't covet your neighbor's wife. Okay? Oh, yeah, she was. Sure. He's a rich man. Potiphar was. He ain't going to marry some cow. I need to apologize to whoever out there I may have offended. Verse 11, now it happened one day that he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the household was there inside. And she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and went outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, well, apparently Potiphar's wife, one of those women that doesn't take rejection well. She was frustrated with his rejections of her, and finally she tried to force the issue. She grabbed his garment, and he ran out of the house to avoid her attentions. Verse 14, she called to the men of her household and said to them, see, he has brought in a Hebrew to us to make sport of us. He came in to lie with me, and I screamed. And it came about when he heard that I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled and went outside. Well, first of all, she blames Potiphar first. Look, he's made sport of us and brought this Hebrew into our household. Okay, she's going to blame everyone but herself. She was mad at more than just Joseph. See, this was a way to get at Potiphar too. Now, she concocts this story about him attacking her and her screaming. I wonder why no one heard her scream before Joseph left. I wonder why not. Verse 16, so she left his garment beside her until his master came home. Then she spoke to him with these words, the Hebrew slave whom you brought to us came into me to make sport of me. And it happened as I raised my voice and screamed that he left his garment beside me and fled outside. Here we are again, the second time Joseph's garment is used as a witness against him. Remember the first time? His brothers took that coat, put blood all over it. Well, she tells her false story of woe to her husband. And let's face it, she doesn't like her husband. All right? Some people, no matter how rich and whatever they are, I think the more they get, the more miserable they get. And then they tend to blame those around them the most for their misery. Verse 19, now it came about when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spoke to him, saying, this is what your slave did to me, that his anger burned. Potiphar's angered at what his wife told him. And you got to wonder, did he believe her? It doesn't sound like this is the first or last time he's had problems with her, okay?
He wanted to believe it.
Well, I think he wanted to not believe it. But how could he look like a man and not do something about that when his wife makes that accusation? He's in a tough position. And I'm sure she put on quite a show in talking about this. I bet the tears were flowing, boo-hooing, she was yelling. Verse 20. So Joseph's master took him and put him into the jail, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in jail. But Yahweh was with Joseph and extended kindness to him. and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. And the chief jailer committed to Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in jail. So whatever was done there, he was responsible for it. Now Joseph was righteous in his actions. Elohim was with him, and he continued to bless him even in prison. Joseph was put in charge of all the prisoners there. Everything Joseph touched flourished. Verse 23, the chief jailer did not supervise anything under Joseph's charge because Yahweh was with him, and whatever he did, Yahweh made to prosper. Keeper of the prison didn't even check in on Joseph. He didn't check in on his work. Elohim was with Joseph, and he was going to use all these things for the good of Joseph and all people. Joseph was doing Elohim's will even in the most difficult of times. We read in Psalm 37, starting at verse 3, trust in Yahweh and do good. Dwell in the land and cultivate faithfulness. Delight yourself in Yahweh, and he'll give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to Yahweh, trust also in him, and he'll do it. He'll bring forth your righteousness as the light and your judgment as the noonday. Rest in Yahweh and wait patiently for him. Do not fret because of him who prospers in his way, because of the man who carries out wicked schemes. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Do not fret, it leads only to evil doing. For evildoers will be cut off, but those who wait for Yahweh, they will inherit the land. Yet a little while, and the wicked man will be no more. And you look carefully for this place, and he will not be there. But the humble will inherit the land and will delight themselves in abundant prosperity. You know, Joseph has suffered greatly. He had his brothers that hated him. He's sold into slavery. He's thrown into prison. But he always trusted in the Father. And all this, the suffering that he did, ended up being for the good of all people. And it's for that reason. A lot of the ancient sages saw that they thought there were going to be two Messiahs. Because if you read Psalm 22 and Isaiah 53 and other places in Scripture, you see a Messiah that greatly suffers for the good of all the people. And you also see a Messiah that's going to reign over the world as king. Now, they said there's going to be a Messiah, ben Joseph, Messiah, son of Joseph, and a Messiah, son of David. They thought that there were going to be two Messiahs because of the way the ancient, the Tanakh had described them. And, you know, they thought it was two Messiahs at one time. They were close. They were very close. It's one Messiah twice. Okay? So those today, like a lot in Orthodox Judaism, say, well, Scriptures don't speak of a Messiah that would suffer for the people and bear their sins. But oh, yes, it does, and your ancient sages said it did. But now that you have a bone to pick, now all of a sudden that disappears. So let's go on to Genesis 40. Verse 1. Then it came about after these things, the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. So it came to pass after these things. This is an indefinite statement of time. We may be able to calculate that Joseph is now 28 years old and that he was sold into slavery 11 years previous to this. But we have no idea how long he was in Potiphar's house and how long he was in prison. We're not told. So we don't know how old he is or how long ago these things really happened. The cupbearer and the baker, they're two servants that have to be very, very trustworthy. If a scandal is among them, it could be hazardous to the king's health. The cupbearer would personally serve wine to the king. His loyalty had to be beyond reproach. He also held a position of great influence as a close and trusted advisor to the king. Egyptian documents testify to the wealth and power of officials in each of these positions. If you have the baker for the king, what if you can't trust him? We got a problem. And either way, it's what the king eats and drinks. They're responsible for it. Verse 2, and Pharaoh was furious with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. So he put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard in the jail, the same place where Joseph was imprisoned. And the captain of the bodyguard put Joseph in charge of them, and he took care of them, and they were in confinement for some time. So Pharaoh threw these two guys in prison, and we are not told what they did. No details at all. I guess they're not important, but they offended Pharaoh in some manner. And Joseph is put over them, it says, for a while. We don't know the length of time that he's put over them. And I find it interesting, too, that Joseph, it says, took care of them instead of vice versa. He is being a servant to the servants while they were there. Verse 5. Then the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt, who were confined in jail, both had a dream the same night. Each man with his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. Now, the dreams of Joseph, or the dreams that he interprets, always happen in pairs. Did you notice that? In this case, two dreams are from two different people, the cupbearer and the baker. Earlier, it was Joseph that had two separate dreams. And later, it's going to be Pharaoh that has two separate dreams. Now, why two dreams? Two witnesses. It's in Elohim's Torah to establish a matter with a testimony of two or more witnesses. Deuteronomy 19, verse 15, a single witness shall not rise up against a man on account of any iniquity or any sin which he has committed. On the evidence of two or three witnesses, a matter shall be confirmed. Yeshua also said this is the manner that this is the way a matter is established. In Matthew 18, starting at verse 15, and if your brother sins, go and reprove him in private. If he listens to you, you've won your brother. But if he does not listen to you, take two or more with you, or take one or two more with you, so that by the mouth of two or three witnesses every fact may be confirmed. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the assembly. If he refuses to listen even to the assembly, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax gatherer. Let him be to you as what? A Gentile. What is that saying? It's not a good guy. Scripture in other places in Matthew refers to them as dogs. How many Christians have you had tell you, well, I'm a Gentile? You got a lot of them tell you that? Yeah, I've had a lot of them tell me that. And I say, I think you are. I agree. I'm not going to argue with you. You've got one little strand of truth that you found. Verses 6 and 7 of Genesis 40. When Joseph came to them in the morning and observed them, behold, they were dejected. And he asked Pharaoh's officials who were with him in confinement in his master's house, why are your faces so sad today? Well, we have two examples in Scripture of men that interpreted dreams. Joseph and who else? Daniel. That's correct. Both men say only Elohim can interpret dreams. So, verse 8, they said to him, we have had a dream and there's no one to interpret it. Then Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to Elohim? Tell it to me, please. Well, like I said, Daniel had mentioned in Daniel 2, verse 28, however, there is an Elohim in heaven who reveals mysteries. And he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the latter days. This was your dream and the visions in your mind while on your bed. Have you ever heard somebody say they can interpret dreams? Have you heard that? I have. In the charismatic movement, of course, I've never been a part of that, but you can find almost anything there. If someone says they can interpret dreams, who are they speaking for? Who are they claiming to speak for? Yeah, that's what they're doing. They're claiming to speak for Elohim. That's risky business, folks. That's a bad idea. Because they're claiming to know secrets that only he can reveal. Now, if they're not a prophet of Elohim, that means they're a spiritist or a diviner. And according to Torah, they're either to be ignored or put to death. Not that we do that. We don't have that power. That's a governmental thing. But in Deuteronomy 18:14, for those nations which you shall dispossess, listen to those who practice witchcraft and to diviners, but as for you, Yahweh your Elohim has not allowed you to do so. Verses 9 through 11. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream, behold, there was a vine in front of me. And on the vine there were 3 branches, and as it was budding, its blossoms came out, and its clusters produced ripe grapes. Now Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. Now, in the cupbearer's dream, we see a blend of fantasy and a blend of reality. We see a telescoping of time in this great growing season. It just happens instantly. Then we also, the production process, which happens instantly, and the serving of finished wine. Now, one of the resources that I usually respect, it's called the Treasury of Scripture Knowledge. And what it really is, and it's one I've used a lot, that in the concordance and just search engine in Scripture. What it'll do, it'll take a phrase in each verse and give you related verses to it, which is what I do, if you've noticed. On occasion, they'll put a note in there to help explain things. But they have so few of those that I admire that, because when they open their mouth and have an explanation, it's not good. For instance, and it says, according to the King James Version, and I took. From this we find that wine anciently was the mere expressed juice of the grape without fermentation. The saki or cupbearer took the bunch, pressed the juice into the cup, and instantly delivered it to his master. That's Treasury of Scripture Knowledge. Well, can we also determine that the grapevines and grapes grew instantly in ancient times? Can we make that conclusion also? Or can we ascertain that this is a dream with the intent of conveying a meaning, instead of trying to tell us that they drank Welch's in days gone by? Verses 12 and 13. Then Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you'll put Pharaoh's cup into his hand, and according to your former custom when you were his cupbearer. Now, the number 3 is prevalent in this dream. The 3 processes of growing grapes, processing them, and serving wine are all accelerated. 3 days, 3 stages, 3 vines, 3 actions performed. And the words Pharaoh and cup are each mentioned 3 times. You know what the number 3 means in Scripture? I don't either. It's just all over here in this little tale. That's all I'm telling you, okay? The cupbearer will again perform his duties in front of Pharaoh according to the meaning of this dream. Verse 14, only keep me in mind when it goes well with you, and please do me a kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. Joseph doesn't ask for any future compensation other than to be remembered in front of Pharaoh. Just remember me. That's a request. Verse 15, for I was in fact kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I've done nothing that they should have put me into the dungeon. Joseph reassures the cupbearer that when he intervenes for him, he will be intervening on behalf of an innocent man. He wants him to know that. Verses 16 and 17. When the chief baker saw that he had interpreted favorably, he said to Joseph, I also saw in my dream, and behold, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. And in the top basket there were some of all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, and the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. Well, the baker takes this opportunity to relate his dream, which has some similarities to the cupbearer's dream. He quickly takes hold of the similarities, but in his humanity, he disregards the important differences. Notice that the uppermost basket is accessible to the birds. He said the basket contains all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh. Now, from ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, we know they had at least 57 varieties of bread and 38 different kinds of cakes that were known to be made at that time. And also note the baker does not have the strength or possess the presence of mind to drive the birds away. Okay, what do birds represent in Scripture? This is obviously a figurative evil. Yeah, or the evil one. You know what he should have said? He should have said, I had a dream too. It's that same one that the cupbearer had. The same dream. Amazing. Amazing. I guess he didn't think of that. Verse 18, then Joseph answered and said, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh off of you. Well, see if that baker ever asked him to interpret a dream again. You know, unlike the cupbearer, the baker does not personally prepare the cakes. He does not personally serve them to Pharaoh. The food doesn't even reach the Pharaoh. It's eaten by birds. This event takes place in 3 days, and it also happens to correspond with the birthday of Pharaoh. The term Pharaoh will lift up your head from you means that Pharaoh will take him out of prison. And but that's just the good part. The bad part is he's going to be hung. Going to be hung in a tree. Not a good dream the baker had. Not a good dream at all. Verse 20. Thus it came about on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday. I told you. Then he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. Then he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had interpreted to them. So the details here, what happened on Pharaoh's birthday, that shows the accuracy of Joseph's interpretations. Verse 23, yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. The Hebrew term that's used there for did not remember, it means it totally left his mind. Totally left his mind. And that's going to happen again. It'll affect the entire people of Israel, and it's that passage we read earlier in Exodus 1:8. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph at all. Didn't even come to his mind. Okay? Any questions on Genesis 39 and 40? All historical?